Extinction. The double-edged impact of plastic waste on our planet is devastating and far-reaching. From crabs getting trapped in plastic cups to turtles being filled with plastic litter, the effects are widespread. Even cows are forced to live on piles of plastic bags and bottles. Whole entire mountains and riverbeds become coated with plastic waste. The worst offender that we can see is a gargantuan Texas-sized plastic patch sitting between Hawaii and California.
Now, we've always known that plastics have been a big problem. However, we've never really considered our approach to them. And are we looking at the right problem? Russell L. Agoff, a pioneer in the field of operational research, once said that successful problem solving requires finding the right solution to the right problem. We fail more often because we solved the wrong problem. So let's start looking. Let's find the real problem. This is plastics, an environmental PSA.
In this environmental PSA about plastics, we will cover plastics, definitions and their uses, their impact on the environment and society, and the solutions to this massive problem. Petrochemicals, which make plastics, are mostly derived from petroleum, but can also be obtained through coal, natural gases, maize, sugarcane, and palm fruit.
There are two main types of petrochemicals produced, olefins and aromatics. We'll focus on olefins as they are the ones used as the basis for plastics. The two different olefins are ethylene and propylene. Ethylene is the most common as well as the most produced organic compound. Propylene follows right after, having half of ethylene's production. Ethylene can be produced with 1 to 2 tons of CO2 emissions per ton of ethylene, and propylene has 0.6 to 2.2 tons.
Using the massive amounts of ethylene and propylene produced, we get even larger numbers of CO2 produced. At a minimum, the total CO2 emissions would be 501.6 million tons of CO2 from plastic production alone.
And so we go deeper. Petrochemicals aren't just used for plastics, but in almost everything and industry. However, plastics pose a significant environmental concern. There are 6 main types of plastics, all being ethylene or propylene. In 2020, an astonishing 117 million tons of polyethylene and 83 million tons of polypropylene were produced. The emissions resulting from the polyethylene were between 117 and 234 million tons of CO2, while the propylene production emitted 50 to 166 million tons of CO2. Combined CO2 emissions from all plastic production reached a staggering 875 million tons, surpassing the total amount of plastic actually produced. Plastics production and energy usage rely on petroleum, with the energy needed contributing to over 3% of total U.S. energy consumption alone. 84% of the world's energy comes from oil, coal, and natural gas, resulting in high CO2 emissions as well.
CO2 levels in the atmosphere have reached their highest point in 800,000 years, with 417 parts per million in 2022. This has led to over 4.51 million deaths from air pollution in 2019. Particularly in China and India, where plastic pollution and high population density are prevalent. The increased CO2 leads to production of carbonic acid, causing harm to marine ecosystems and contributing to acid rain that affects land-based ecosystems. Rising CO2 levels trap more solar energy in the atmosphere, leading to higher temperatures, melting ice caps, rising sea levels, increased fire risks, changes in seasonal patterns, and altered weather availability. These climate impacts include more intense hurricanes, floods, heat waves, and droughts. The melting of polar ice caps release more CO2 emissions, creating a feedback loop that accelerates further ice melting and climate change.
While CO2 emissions are a pressing concern, now let's focus on that of plastic waste and pollution. It's an aggravating issue as vanity and apathy prevail within the industry. Plastic pollution represents the second stage and poses significant harm. Just like all the animals we saw mentioned earlier, we are also affected by this problem. Improper disposal and recycling practices are at the core of the problem. Each person produces over a ton of plastic, with 30% of that plastic that is wasted being incinerated, causing more emissions and energy consumption. Around 60% of the waste plastic is discarded in inadequate landfills or directly pollutes the environment. Shockingly, a total of 4.9 billion tons of plastic waste has already been discarded, with a mere 0.1 billion tons being recycled. Out of the annual production of 270 million tons, 8 million find their way into the ocean. These plastics contain tens of thousands of chemicals, with 2,400 of them being deemed harmful to the environment. To understand how plastic reaches the ocean, we must delve into recycling. This is a 3-part process involving collection, sorting, and the processing of plastics.
And if recycling goes wrong,
all of the plastics will eventually end up in our waterways and our ocean.
Where it's very important, like if you want to recycle something, you need to get like really good pure source of those material, and you don't want any contamination.
So like what are these contaminants? Like the additives that they add to like flame retardants and all that?
Yeah, those are one kinds, but again, like if you have like same kind of plastic and if you want to recycle, if you can get like that same kind of plastics again, then it's easy to recycle. And the contaminants that could be in these materials, it could be like contamination of some other kind of plastic. If it's not like sorted properly, then you get those kind of contaminants. And the other thing is, it's mostly because of the way these are separated. So like, I mean, in most of the cases so far, all these materials has been like hand separated. Uh, the company that we are working with, they want to make it like automated
process.
So they want to separate it by the categories, by different categories of the plastics, and they want to use images. They want to use analytical techniques like Raman and NIR, and they want to use artificial intelligence. And then beyond that, I think what you mentioned, policy, education.
Yeah, because a lot of the people that are handling the plastics in the Southeast Asia, they aren't educated. There's no policies down there that are stopping the waste from going into the rivers. The governments just don't want to spend the money to establish regulations and enforce the regulations for that.
Yeah, so I mean those are huge things, and especially like in third world countries, education, outreach, and implementation of strict policies. I think those are the things that will help in long term.
So what actually harms our environment, kills animals, and prevents recycling? They're called forever chemicals. These are added to chemicals as ways to alter their chemical properties. They harm the environment and contaminate any other materials that could be recycled, hindering the process. What is chemical recycling, and is it worth it?
Instead of looking at the mechanical recycling, we are looking at chemical recycling of those materials. So since all these materials, all these plastics is made from petroleum, so what we're doing is we are taking that plastic and then converting it back into petroleum crude oil. So then it can either be converted into fuel or it can be again converted into petrochemicals.
Landfills are a good idea for a low-cost option, but they will only work if they can be properly constructed.
Economics also plays its part in the plastic recycling industry.
The two kinds of plastic that gets recycled mostly are number 1 and number 2 kind of plastic. Number 1 is polyethylene terephthalate, and then the number 2 is HDPE.
Yeah.
And there has, I mean, since the market for recycling those has already been established, and the reason the recyclers, they collect those materials and they recycle because there's already a good market. So when they collect those materials, they can sell it. I mean, they can sell those bales that they collect for these materials somehow. So I think they need to put like more incentives so that more and more companies they start producing these materials. And remember that producing plastic from petroleum, it's cheaper compared to producing a biodegradable plastic. So if you want the biodegradable plastic to be in the market, or the use of bio-based material for making this different kind of plastics or materials, then there has to be some incentives.
An alternative is biodegradable plastics, which will eventually break down and be consumed by insects. However, these are around 3 times more expensive than conventional plastics. So what can we do? What impact can our current generation make on this problem? Well, we can do the 4 R's, which are reuse, reduce, recycle, and recover. Any impact counts, no matter how small. So get on with it. Get out of the world and make your own impact.